Instead, she stammered through a half-hearted explanation, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought he was a threat," she said, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "He wasn't moving." I panicked. Even as she spoke, she knew how feeble her reasoning sounded. Panic was no defense, especially when it resulted in such reckless behavior. The officer listened patiently, jotting down notes, but his expression remained unreadable. Karen couldn't tell if he believed her or thought she was completely out of line. Outside, the buzz of activity continued. Paramedics arrived to tend to the guard, ensuring that his condition wasn't serious. Reporters began gathering near the palace gates, eager to get statements from witnesses. The story was spreading rapidly, fueled by the videos and photos uploaded by onlookers. By the time Karen left the security office, her name and face would be plastered across news outlets and social media feeds worldwide. But none of that mattered right now. All Karen could think about was the guard's pained expression and the horrified reactions of the crowd. She had acted out of fear, but in doing so, she had caused harm to an innocent person and disrupted a historic event. The guilt was suffocating, and she knew it would haunt her for a long time to come. Back home, the internet was ablaze with reactions to the incident. Videos of the pepper spray attack had gone viral, sparking heated debates across social media. Some people criticized Karen harshly, calling her reckless and irresponsible. Others defended her, pointing out that fear can drive people to irrational decisions. News outlets covered the story extensively, dubbing it Peppergate, and speculating about potential legal consequences. Despite the backlash, Karen couldn't stop thinking about the guard's forgiveness. It wasn't just his words that stayed with her. It was the calmness in his demeanor, the lack of bitterness or resentment. In a way, his response had been more humbling than any punishment could have been. It forced her to confront the full weight of her mistake and consider how she could move forward from here. That night, lying awake in bed, Karen made a decision. She wouldn't let this incident define her. Yes, she had made a terrible error in judgment, but she also had the power to learn from it and grow. She resolved to reach out to the guard personally, to thank him for his grace, and to express her remorse once more. More importantly, she vowed to be more mindful in the future, to pause, think, and act with intention rather than impulse. As sleep finally claimed her, Karen felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to turn this regrettable moment into an opportunity for change. The chaos that erupted after Karen sprayed the guard was immediate and overwhelming. The once peaceful atmosphere at Buckingham Palace transformed into a scene of confusion and alarm. Tourists who had been casually enjoying the changing of the guard ceremony were now scrambling to figure out what had just happened. Some pointed fingers at Karen, their expressions a mix of shock and anger. Others quickly pulled out their phones, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama on video. Children began to cry, startled by the sudden noise and commotion, while parents tried to shield them from the chaos. Security personnel sprang into action almost instantly. Several guards rushed toward the injured man, shouting orders as they formed a protective circle around him. One of them knelt beside him, speaking in a calm but urgent tone, while another radioed for medical assistance. Despite his obvious discomfort, the guard managed to wave off some of the help, attempting to regain his composure. His face was red, his eyes watering profusely, and he coughed violently as the effects of the pepper spray lingered. It was clear that he was in significant pain, yet he remained stoic, refusing to let the situation escalate further. Meanwhile, Karen stood frozen in place, her mind racing faster than her heart. She watched as the crowd turned its collective attention toward her, their stares filled with judgment and disbelief. Whispers spread like wildfire. Did she really just do that? Why would anyone attack a royal guard? Is this some kind of prank? Each comment felt like a dagger piercing her already fragile state. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, and tears streamed down her face as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. A group of security officers approached her cautiously, their body language firm but controlled. One of them asked her to step aside, his voice steady but tinged with authority. Karen complied without resistance, too ashamed to argue or explain herself. As she moved away from the crowd, she noticed that people were recording her, not just casually, but with intense focus, as if she were the main character in some bizarre reality show. She could hear snippets of their conversations. "She looks so scared. I can't believe she did that. This is going viral for sure." The realization that her actions were being broadcast online hit her like a ton of bricks. Social media platforms thrived on moments like this. Unexpected, dramatic, and utterly ridiculous. Within minutes, clips of the incident would likely be shared across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, turning her into an internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. The thought made her feel physically ill. What started as a simple outing to see the changing of the guard had spiraled into a public spectacle, and Karen knew there was no escaping it. As the security team led her away from the scene, Karen glanced back at the injured guard one last time. He was still struggling to recover, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief offered by one of his colleagues. Though his expression remained neutral, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she had disrespected not only him, but also the institution he represented. These guards weren't just soldiers. They were symbols of tradition, discipline, and national pride. And she had violated that in the most humiliating way possible. The walk to the nearby security office felt endless. Every step weighed heavily on Karen's shoulders, both literally and figuratively. Her legs trembled beneath her, and her chest tightened with each breath. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air and escape the consequences of her impulsive decision. But there was no running away now. The damage was done, and she would have to face the music. When they finally reached the office, Karen was ushered inside and asked to sit down. A stern-looking officer began questioning her, his tone professional but firm. "Can you explain what happened?" he asked, pen poised over a notepad. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. How could she possibly justify spraying a member of the Queen's Guard? There was no excuse that would make this okay. Karen was not the kind of person who took risks or lived life on the edge. She was practical, careful, and always prepared for whatever might come her way. Growing up in a busy city like London had taught her to stay alert and trust her instincts. That's why she always carried a small canister of pepper spray in her purse. It gave her a sense of security, even though she never once needed to use it. It was more of a just-in-case thing, something she hoped would sit unused at the bottom of her bag forever. On this particular morning, Karen woke up feeling unusually excited. The weather outside was crisp and cool, with golden sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. Autumn was her favorite season, and today seemed perfect for exploring one of London's most iconic landmarks, Buckingham Palace. She had heard so much about the changing of the guard ceremony and how fascinating it was to watch. People from all over the world came just to see those red uniformed soldiers marching in perfect formation, their tall furry hats bobbing rhythmically as they moved. Karen decided that today was the day she would finally experience it herself. After grabbing a quick breakfast, Karen packed her essentials, her phone, wallet, a bottle of water, and of course, her trusty pepper spray. As she stepped out of her apartment, she couldn't help but feel a little thrill of anticipation. The streets were alive with energy. Tourists snapped photos, street vendors called out to passersby, and the air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts. Everything felt normal, ordinary even. Karen had no idea that within hours her name would be trending online and her life would take an unexpected turn. When she arrived at Buckingham Palace, the scene was exactly what she'd imagined. A sea of people gathered behind metal barriers, cameras clicking away as they waited for the famous guards to appear. Karen found a spot near the front, craning her neck to get a better view. The palace itself looked majestic, its grand architecture standing proudly against the clear blue sky. She felt a strange mix of awe and nervousness. There was something about being so close to such a historic place that made her heart race slightly. As she scanned the area, Karen noticed a figure standing nearby. At first glance, he looked like any other tourist, but then she realized he wasn't moving. Not even a little bit. He stood completely still, his posture rigid, almost unnatural. Closer inspection revealed that he was dressed in full ceremonial attire, the bright red jacket, shiny black boots, and that enormous bearskin hat that made him look twice as tall. Karen blinked, momentarily confused. Was he real? Or was this some kind of elaborate statue designed to trick visitors? She leaned forward slightly, squinting at him. His expression was blank, his gaze fixed straight ahead, as if he didn't notice the crowd around him. Karen chuckled softly under her breath. She'd heard stories about tourists mistaking these royal guards for statues because they stood so still. Some people even tried to touch them, only to be startled when the guards shifted positions unexpectedly. Still, there was something unsettling about this particular guard. Maybe it was the way he seemed to blend into the background yet command attention at the same time. Or maybe it was just Karen's imagination playing tricks on her. Despite her initial amusement, Karen couldn't shake off a nagging sense of unease. Something about the situation felt off. Why was he standing here alone, away from the main group of guards? Wasn't he supposed to be part of the ceremony? Her mind started racing with possibilities, each one more far-fetched than the last. What if he wasn't really a guard at all? What if someone had disguised themselves in uniform to cause trouble? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Karen glanced around, noticing that no one else seemed alarmed. Everyone else appeared relaxed, chatting casually or taking pictures. Surely, if there was something wrong, someone else would have noticed by now. But Karen's instincts told her otherwise. Her grip tightened on her purse, fingers brushing against the cold metal of her pepper spray. Just in case, Karen sat in the small, dimly lit security office, her head bowed and her hands clasped tightly together. The room was quiet except for the occasional rustling of papers as the officer continued to document the incident. Her mind, however, was anything but calm. It raced with thoughts of what would happen next. Would she be arrested? Taken to court? Publicly shamed? Each possibility felt heavier than the last, pressing down on her chest until it became hard to breathe. The officer finished writing and looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done?" he asked, his voice measured but firm. Karen nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I thought he was a threat." Even as she said the words, they sounded hollow, even to her own ears. She knew deep down that her actions had been reckless and unjustified. After what felt like an eternity, the officer stood up and gestured for her to follow him. They walked back toward the palace grounds, where the chaos had begun to settle. Paramedics were still tending to the guard, who now sat on a bench, his face flushed and his eyes red but otherwise appearing stable. Seeing him in person again made Karen's stomach churn with guilt. She wanted to apologize, to explain herself, but she didn't know if she'd even be allowed to speak to him. To her surprise, the officer led her directly to the guard. "You should say something," the officer said quietly, stepping aside to give her space. Karen hesitated, unsure of what to do. Her heart pounded as she approached the man, her steps slow and hesitant. When she finally stood in front of him, she could barely meet his gaze. Instead, she focused on the ground, her voice barely audible as she began to speak. "I'm so sorry," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I had thought you were going to hurt me. I panicked. I didn't mean to cause you pain or disrespect your role. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked under the weight of her emotions, and tears streamed down her face. For a moment, there was silence. The guard didn't respond immediately, and Karen braced herself for anger or rejection. But when he finally spoke, his tone was surprisingly calm. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice raspy from the effects of the pepper spray. I understand how fear can make people act without thinking. I've been in situations where I felt the same way. His words caught Karen off guard. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. How could he possibly forgive her after what she had done? The guard went on to explain that while the experience had been painful and embarrassing, he recognized that her actions weren't malicious. We're trained to stay calm and composed, no matter what happens, he said. But it's not always easy for others to understand that. You probably didn't realize how harmless I actually was. His kindness only made Karen feel worse. She had attacked someone who was simply doing their job, someone who had shown nothing but professionalism despite the absurd circumstances. "Thank you for being so understanding," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll never forgive myself for this. If there's anything I can do to make it right, please let me know." The guard gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Just learn from this," he said gently. "And maybe next time, try to take a moment before reacting. Sometimes things aren't as dangerous as they seem." Those words stuck with Karen long after the conversation ended. As she was escorted away from the palace grounds, she replayed them in her mind over and over again. He was right. She had let fear cloud her judgment, jumping to conclusions without taking the time to assess the situation properly. The guard hadn't posed any real threat. He was just doing his duty, standing tall and proud as a symbol of tradition and discipline. And she had ruined that moment for him, and for everyone else who had come to witness the ceremony. Once outside the palace gates, Karen found herself surrounded by reporters eager to get her side of the story. Cameras flashed in her face, and microphones were thrust toward her as questions came rapid fire. Why did you attack the guard? Do you regret your actions? What were you thinking? Overwhelmed, Karen shielded her face with her hands and hurried past them, desperate to escape the spotlight. The days following the incident were a blur for Karen. News of her pepper spray mishap dominated headlines, social media feeds, and even late-night talk shows. Memes mocking her actions circulated online, turning her into both a punchline and a cautionary tale. Some people called her reckless, while others labeled her paranoid. The phrase, "Karen's pepper spray," became synonymous with overreaction, a label she knew would stick to her for a long time. Despite the public ridicule, the legal consequences weighed heaviest on her mind. Authorities took the matter seriously, charging her with assault on a member of the Queen's Guard, a military officer no less. The charge carried significant penalties, including potential fines and even jail time. Karen hired a lawyer who specialized in criminal defense, hoping to mitigate the fallout. During their meetings, the lawyer explained that her case would likely attract widespread attention due to its unusual nature. "You need to prepare yourself," he warned her. "This isn't just about the law anymore. It's about public perception." Karen spent hours replaying the incident in her head, analyzing every detail. She couldn't shake the image of the guard's pained expression or the horrified reactions of the crowd. It haunted her dreams and consumed her waking thoughts. She began losing sleep, skipping meals, and avoiding conversations with friends and family. Her usually upbeat personality faded, replaced by guilt and self-doubt. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alone. To make matters worse, her employer called her into a meeting. Karen worked as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm, a job she had held for nearly a decade. Her boss, though sympathetic, explained that the negative publicity surrounding her name was affecting the company's reputation. Clients had started asking questions, and some were even reconsidering contracts. Reluctantly, they placed her on temporary leave until the situation resolved itself. Walking out of the office that day, Karen felt like she had lost another piece of her identity. Amidst the chaos, Karen decided to take responsibility for her actions. She wrote a heartfelt public apology letter, addressing not only the guard, but also the general public. In it, she expressed deep regret for her behavior, acknowledging how fear had clouded her judgment. She emphasized that she never intended to harm anyone and vowed to learn from the experience. "I understand now that I acted impulsively and caused unnecessary pain," she wrote. For that, I am truly sorry." She shared the letter on social media, knowing full well that it wouldn't stop the criticism. But to her surprise, many people responded positively. Some praised her for owning up to her mistake, while others admitted they might have reacted similarly under extreme stress. A few commenters even shared stories of their own moments of panic, creating a sense of solidarity. Though the negativity hadn't disappeared entirely, the supportive messages gave Karen a sliver of hope. Determined to make amends, Karen visited the injured guard in the hospital. She brought flowers and a handwritten note, hoping he would agree to see her. When she arrived, she was nervous. What if he refused to meet with her? To her relief, he welcomed her warmly, his demeanor as kind and composed as before. They sat together in a quiet corner of the hospital lounge, where Karen apologized once more, this time face to face. "I can't thank you enough for forgiving me," she said, her voice trembling. "What I did was wrong, and I'll carry that with me forever. If there's anything I can do to make things right, please tell me." The guard smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting understanding rather than anger. "Apologizing is a good start," he replied, "and learning from this will help ensure it doesn't happen again." Their conversation lasted nearly an hour, during which Karen learned more about the guard's role and the discipline required to serve in such a prestigious position. He spoke about the challenges of maintaining composure in unpredictable situations and how the uniform often made him seem intimidating to outsiders. By the end of their talk, Karen felt a renewed sense of respect for him and his colleagues. Leaving the hospital, Karen realized that facing the consequences of her actions wasn't easy, but it was necessary. While the road ahead remained uncertain, she felt a small spark of optimism. She had taken the first step toward redemption, and though the journey would be difficult, she was ready to face it head-on. Months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Karen's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. What started as a moment of panic and poor judgment had become a catalyst for personal growth and meaningful change. She no longer saw herself as the woman who pepper-sprayed a royal guard, but as someone who had taken responsibility for her actions and turned them into an opportunity to help others. Karen's public speaking engagements became a central part of her new life. She traveled to schools, community centers, and corporate offices, sharing her story with audiences eager to learn from her experience. Each talk was different, sometimes funny, sometimes emotional, but always impactful. People connected with her honesty and vulnerability, finding inspiration in how she had faced her fears and worked to make amends. Her message resonated deeply, especially with young people who often struggled with impulsive decisions and peer pressure. One particular event stood out among the rest. It was a large gathering at a youth leadership conference held in a grand auditorium filled with hundreds of teenagers. As Karen stepped onto the stage, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves. But when she looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her, curiosity and anticipation written all over them, she felt a surge of determination. This was her chance to leave a lasting impression on these young minds. She began by recounting the infamous Peppergate incident, weaving humor into her retelling to lighten the mood. The audience laughed at her self-deprecating jokes, instantly warming up to her. Then, she transitioned to the more serious aspects of her story, the guilt, the backlash, and the valuable lessons she had learned along the way. Her voice softened as she spoke about the injured guard's forgiveness, emphasizing how one act of kindness can have a ripple effect. "What I want you to take away from my story," she said, leaning forward slightly to connect with the audience, "is that everyone makes mistakes. Big ones, small ones. It doesn't matter. What defines us isn't the mistake itself, but what we do afterward. Do we run away from it, or do we face it head-on and try to make things right?" The room was silent, every teenager hanging on her words. Karen then introduced a simple yet powerful exercise she called the pause principle. She explained that whenever they found themselves in a stressful or uncertain situation, they should pause for 3 seconds before reacting. 3 seconds might not seem like much, she said, but it's enough time to ask yourself, is this fear real, Or is it just in my head? Am I seeing the full picture, or am I jumping to conclusions? Afterward, several students approached her to share their thoughts. One girl admitted that she often acted impulsively when she felt threatened or judged, leading to arguments with friends. "Your story made me realize I need to slow down and think before I react," she said. Another boy thanked Karen for reminding him that owning up to his mistakes was a sign of strength, not weakness. These interactions filled Karen with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced before. Beyond her speaking career, Karen also channeled her energy into volunteer work. She joined a local organization focused on teaching conflict resolution skills to at-risk youth. Through workshops and mentorship programs, she helped young people develop strategies for managing stress, fear, and anger. Seeing the positive impact she was making reinforced her belief that even the worst mistakes could lead to something good. As time went on, the media frenzy surrounding her incident gradually faded. News outlets stopped running updates, memes disappeared from social feeds, and Peppergate became little more than a distant memory for most people. For Karen, however, it remained a pivotal chapter in her life, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. On quiet evenings, Karen would sit by her window, reflecting on her journey. She thought about the guard who had shown her such grace and understanding, wondering if he ever thought about her too. Occasionally, she sent him updates about her advocacy work, hoping he knew how much his forgiveness had meant to her. Though they hadn't spoken since their hospital meeting, his kindness continued to shape her life in profound ways. Looking ahead, Karen felt hopeful and optimistic. She had discovered a passion for helping others navigate challenges and make better choices. Her calendar was already filling up with invitations to speak at conferences, write articles, and collaborate with organizations dedicated to personal development. While she couldn't erase the past, she had learned to embrace it as part of her story, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the power of second chances. In the end, Karen realized that life wasn't defined by its mistakes, but by the lessons we. In the weeks that followed, Karen began to rebuild her life piece by piece. The legal proceedings were still ongoing, but she had managed to strike a deal with prosecutors thanks to her lawyer's efforts and her sincere apology. Instead of facing jail time, she was sentenced to community service, which included speaking at local schools and community centers about personal safety, accountability, and the dangers of acting impulsively out of fear. At first, the idea of standing in front of strangers and sharing her story terrified her. But as she prepared for her first talk, she realized it could be an opportunity, not just to make amends but to inspire others. Karen's first speaking engagement took place at a small community center in her neighborhood. She walked into the room feeling nervous, clutching her notes tightly. A modest crowd of about 30 people had gathered, ranging from teenagers to senior citizens. Some looked curious, while others seemed skeptical. As she stepped up to the podium, Karen took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was there, to turn her mistake into something meaningful. "Hi everyone," she began, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Karen, and I'm here today because I made a big mistake, one that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. She hesitated for a moment, then continued. "A few weeks ago, I did something incredibly foolish. I pepper-sprayed a member of the Queen's Guard outside Buckingham Palace. It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? Trust me, I still can't believe it myself." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, with a mix of humor and humility, she recounted the events leading up to the incident. She described how her fear got the better of her, how she misinterpreted the guard's stillness as a threat, and how her impulsive decision led to chaos. Her tone was honest and self-deprecating, drawing occasional chuckles from the audience. But when she spoke about the aftermath, the guilt, the public backlash, and the injured guard's forgiveness, her voice grew softer, more reflective. "I learned so much from this experience," she said, looking directly at the audience. "First, I learned that fear can cloud your judgment. When you're scared, it's easy to jump to conclusions without thinking things through. Second, I learned that taking responsibility for your actions is one of the hardest, but most important, things you can do. And finally, I learned that kindness has the power to change everything. That guard didn't have to forgive me, but he did. His compassion taught me more than any punishment ever could. As she wrapped up her speech, Karen encouraged the audience to think critically about their own reactions in stressful situations. We live in a world where we're constantly bombarded with information, and sometimes misinformation. It's easy to let fear take over. But before you act, take a moment to pause. Ask yourself, is this really a threat, or am I letting my imagination run wild? You'd be surprised how often the answer is simpler than you think. The room erupted into applause when she finished, and several people approached her afterward to thank her for sharing her story. One woman told Karen that her talk had inspired her to be more mindful in her daily life. A teenage boy admitted that he often acted impulsively and appreciated hearing about the consequences of such behavior. Even the event organizer praised Karen for her courage, saying her honesty had resonated deeply with the audience. Word of Karen's talk spread quickly, and soon she was invited to speak at larger venues, including high schools and workplace seminars. Each time, she refined her message, adding new insights and anecdotes based on feedback from previous audiences. Over time, she became less focused on apologizing for her past and more focused on empowering others to avoid similar mistakes. Her transformation was remarkable. From someone burdened by shame to someone determined to create positive change. Her newfound purpose also helped mend relationships in her personal life. Friends and family who had initially distanced themselves during the height of the scandal slowly came back into her life, proud of how she was handling the situation. Her employer even reached out, offering her old job back once the media attention died down. Though Karen declined, choosing instead to pursue opportunities related to public speaking and advocacy work, she felt grateful for the support. One day, while scrolling through social media, Karen stumbled upon a comment thread discussing her incident. To her surprise, many people now viewed her story as a lesson in accountability rather than a source of ridicule. Someone wrote, "I used to think Karen was ridiculous, but after hearing her speak, I realized we've all made mistakes. What matters is what you do after." As Karen continued to stare at the motionless guard, her mind raced with questions. Was this normal behavior for someone in his position? She had heard stories about how disciplined and stoic the Queen's guards were, but this felt different. It wasn't just his stillness that unnerved her, it was the way he seemed disconnected from everything around him. The other guards nearby occasionally shifted their weight or glanced subtly at the crowd, but this one remained perfectly frozen, like a statue carved out of stone. Karen tried to calm herself down. "It's probably nothing," she muttered under her breath, trying to convince herself more than anyone else. But her eyes kept darting back to him, unable to look away. Her imagination began to run wild. What if this wasn't even a real guard? In a city as big and chaotic as London, anything could happen. Maybe someone had sneaked into the uniform to blend in and cause trouble. Or worse, what if they were targeting tourists? She shook her head, attempting to dismiss the thought. That was ridiculous, right? The palace grounds were some of the most secure areas in the entire country. There were security cameras everywhere, police officers patrolling, and countless witnesses milling about. Surely, no one would dare try something here. Still, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Her unease grew when the guard made a slight adjustment. At first, it was almost imperceptible. A tiny shift in his stance, barely noticeable, unless you were staring directly at him like Karen was. But then his hand moved ever so slightly, resting on the holster of his ceremonial weapon. To anyone else, it might have looked routine, part of maintaining his posture during the long hours of standing still. But to Karen, it felt deliberate, intentional, like he was preparing for something. Her heart began to pound faster. Okay, she whispered to herself, clutching her purse tightly. "You're overthinking this." He's probably just doing his job. But her inner voice wasn't convincing enough. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious. After all, better safe than sorry, right? She reached into her bag, her fingers closing around the familiar shape of her pepper spray. Just holding it gave her a small sense of control, a reminder that she wasn't completely helpless. The crowd around her seemed oblivious to her growing anxiety. Tourists laughed and chatted excitedly, snapping photos and pointing at the palace gates. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking when the guards would start marching. Vendors called out to passers-by, offering snacks and souvenirs. Everything appeared normal, peaceful even. Yet Karen felt like she was trapped in a bubble, cut off from the cheerful atmosphere surrounding her. All she could focus on was the figure standing a few feet away. Her eyes narrowed as she studied him more closely. His face was expressionless, his gaze fixed straight ahead, but there was something about his presence that didn't sit well with her. Maybe it was the way his uniform seemed too perfect, too polished, or maybe it was the fact that he hadn't blinked once since she'd been watching him. Whatever it was, it gnawed at her, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. And then it happened again. The guard shifted slightly, this time turning his head just a fraction of an inch. It was such a subtle movement that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Karen did. Her breath hitched in her throat. Was he looking at her? She couldn't tell for sure, but the idea sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her body. Her grip on the pepper spray tightened, her knuckles turning white. "Get a hold of yourself," she muttered softly, glancing around to see if anyone else shared her concern. But everyone else seemed perfectly relaxed, enjoying the spectacle without a care in the world. No one else seemed to find the guard suspicious. That only made Karen feel worse. Was she overreacting? Was she letting her imagination get the best of her? But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore her instincts. They had kept her safe in the past, guiding her through dangerous situations in a city where danger often lurked in unexpected places. And right now, those instincts were screaming at her to act. Before she could second-guess herself any further, Karen made a decision. If this man posed even the slightest threat, she wouldn't hesitate to protect herself, and possibly others around her. Her mind flashed back to self-defense classes she had taken years ago. The instructor's words echoed in her ears. "Trust your gut. Don't wait until it's too late." Those words replayed in her head like a mantra, urging her to take action. Slowly, carefully, she pulled the pepper spray from her purse, keeping it hidden in her palm. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat louder than the last. She knew what she was about to do was risky, but fear had taken over. Karen's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Every logical part of her brain screamed that she might be overreacting. But the primal instinct to protect herself drowned out those quieter voices. Her fingers tightened around the pepper spray, sweat making the small canister feel slippery in her grasp. She kept telling herself it was just a precaution, that she wasn't going to use it unless absolutely necessary. But the longer she stood there, staring at the guard, the more convinced she became that something wasn't right. The guard shifted again, this time more noticeably. His boots scuffed softly against the pavement as he adjusted his weight from one foot to the other. To anyone else, it would have looked like a routine movement. Perhaps he was simply trying to relieve some tension after standing still for so long. But to Karen, it felt deliberate, calculated, like he was preparing for something. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she took an involuntary step backward, creating space between herself and the figure. Her heart raced faster with every passing second. What if he's not really a guard? She thought frantically. What if this is some kind of trick? What if he's dangerous? The questions looped endlessly in her mind, each one amplifying her panic. She glanced around again, hoping someone else might share her concern, but everyone seemed oblivious. Tourists continued snapping photos, children laughed, and vendors called out cheerfully. No one else appeared to notice, or care, that the guard had moved. Karen's hands trembled as she held the pepper spray close to her chest, hidden from view. She tried to rationalize her next move. Maybe she should walk away, leave the area entirely, and avoid whatever danger she imagined was lurking. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, frozen by fear and indecision. If she left now, what if the guard followed her? What if he attacked someone else while she did nothing? The thought of turning her back on him made her stomach churn. Then, without warning, the guard turned his head slightly. It was such a subtle movement that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Karen saw it clearly. His eyes flicked toward her for the briefest moment before returning to their usual forward-facing position. That split second was enough to send her into a full-blown panic. Had he been looking at her? Was he targeting her specifically? Her imagination spiraled out of control, conjuring up worst-case scenarios. Before she could stop herself, Karen acted on impulse. Her body moved faster than her thoughts, driven purely by adrenaline. With a shaky hand, she raised the pepper spray and pressed down on the nozzle. A fine mist shot through the air, catching the guard square in the face. For a moment, everything froze. Time seemed to stand still as Karen watched the scene unfold in slow motion. The guard staggered backward, letting out a sharp gasp of pain. His hands flew to his eyes, rubbing furiously as he coughed and choked on the burning spray. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps rippled through the gathered tourists, followed by murmurs of shock and disbelief. Some people pointed accusingly at Karen, while others whipped out their phones to record the chaos. Children cried, startled by the sudden commotion, and nearby guards rushed toward the scene, shouting orders in firm, authoritative voices. The peaceful atmosphere dissolved into pandemonium within seconds. Karen froze, her arms still extended, the empty canister dangling limply in her hand. Reality crashed down on her like a tidal wave. What had she done? The guard wasn't attacking anyone. He hadn't even moved aggressively. He'd just been standing there, doing his job. And now, because of her reckless actions, he was doubled over in pain, struggling to breathe. Her stomach twisted with guilt, and tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to apologize, to explain herself, but the words caught in her throat. How could she possibly justify spraying a member of the Queen's Guard with pepper spray? It was unthinkable, absurd even. Yet here she was, standing in the middle of Buckingham Palace grounds, surrounded by horrified onlookers and angry security personnel. The gravity of her mistake hit her like a freight train, leaving her paralyzed with shame. As the guard stumbled further away, clutching his face, Karen finally lowered her arm. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and her vision blurred with tears. She felt sick to her stomach, overwhelmed by the realization that she had caused this entire scene. Panic gave way to regret, and regret morphed into sheer horror. What would happen to her now? Would she be arrested, sued, publicly shamed? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. For the first time in her life, Karen wished she could turn back time. She would give anything to undo what she had just done, to erase the past few moments, and make everything go back to normal. But it was too blah.